Yeah, a little bit down. दिख नहीं इसलिए, right?
Well, yeah, but I would decide that. Maybe it's better, put something on here.
Okay.
Because otherwise it won't, rock and roll and everything. So this is fine. I mean, if you go to the side, that's
all right. Better?
Okay. Nothing sacrilegious going on? Swami's the referee of of decorum here, so.
I'm going to sing a Tagore song. Rabindranath Tagore presented this to Sri Ramakrishna, sang this before Sri Ramakrishna. So this is a special significance for us. He played this on piano and sang it before him on May 2nd, 1883. The song is Amar Matha Nato Kore Dao, He Tomar Chorono Thunlar Tole. I have a translation that I've done on my own. I couldn't get hold of an authentic one. I tried on my own. The translation goes like this. Unto the dust of thy feet, make me bow down. In tears, may all my arrogance drown. The quest to glorify myself always ends in belittling self. Around my name so senseless, I keep revolving in circles endless. In my work, self-promotion may I shun. Through me, may all thine be done. I seek thy peace everlasting, thy supreme image within me resting. In my heart's sacred field, stand tall as my shield. Unto the dust of thy feet, make me bow down. In tears, may all my arrogance drown. Now the music. আমার মাথা নত করে দাও হে তোমার চরণ ধুলার আমার মাথা নত. So Rabindranath Tagore's father, Devendranath Tagore, from Brahmo Samaj, they were worshippers of Nirakar Brahma, and there is a part of the gospel in which Ramakrishna goes to meet Sri Ramakrishna meets Devendranath Tagore. রেখে বলি করি অপমান আপনারে শুধু ঘেরিয়া ঘেরিয়া ঘুরে মরি ফলে ফলে আমার মাথা নত করে দাও হে তোমার চরণ ধুলার তলে। আমারি না যেন করি প্রচার আমার আপন কাজে তোমারি ইচ্ছা করো হে পূর্ণ আমার জীবন মাঝে যাচি হে তোমার চরম শান্তি পরাণে তোমার পরম কান্তি যাচি হে তোমার চরম শান্তি পরাণে তোমার পরম কান্তি আমারে আড়াল করিয়া দাঁড়াও হৃদয় পদ্ম তলে আমার মাথা নত করে দাও হে তোমার চরণ ধুলার তলে সকল অহংকার হে আমার ডোবাও চোখের জলে আমার মাথা নত করে দাও হে তোমার চরণ ধুলার তলে।
We have plenty of time.
সেখানে শিখতে হয়।
অন্তরে জাগিয়েছিল, অন্তরে জাগি হতে পারে।
বেশি জানাবি খুবই কম।
সুন্দর গাইলেন।
Thank you. The next one I'm going to try is Shokuli Tomari Ichha, that is many times mentioned in the Gospel. Thakur sang it himself so many times on 28th July 1885 and several other times. The translation, it's a little simplified by me. Apologies for that. The original translation is in the Gospel. It's all your self-willed Tara Ma, your name. You do your deeds, yet to doership they lay claim. You trap the mighty elephant in a mire, while letting the lame scale peaks higher. To some, you elevate to Brahman's bliss, and others you plunge into the abyss. Instrument I am, and you the operator. I am but the house, you the true dweller. Chariot I am, you the charioteer. I move only as you guide me, my dear. It's all your self-willed Tarama, your name. You do your deeds, yet to doership they lay claim. সকলি তোমারি ইচ্ছা, ইচ্ছাময়ী তারা তুমি, তোমার কর্ম তুমি করো মা, লোকে বলে করিয়া আমি, সকলি তোমারি ইচ্ছা, ইচ্ছাময়ী তারা তুমি, তোমার কর্ম তুমি করো মা, লোকে বলে করিয়া আমি। পঙ্কে বদ্ধ করো করি, পঙ্গুরে লঙ্ঘাও গিরি, পঙ্কে বদ্ধ করো করি, পঙ্গুরে লঙ্ঘাও গিরি, কারে দামা ব্রহ্মপদ, কারে করো অধগামী, সকলি তোমারি ইচ্ছা, ইচ্ছাময়ী তারা তুমি, তোমার কর্ম তুমি করো মা, লোকে বলে করিয়া আমি। আমি যন্ত্র তুমি যন্ত্রী, আমি ঘর তুমি ঘরণী, আমি যন্ত্র তুমি যন্ত্রী, আমি ঘর তুমি ঘরণী, আমি রথ তুমি রথী, যেমন চালাও তেমনি চলি, আমি রথ তুমি রথী, যেমন চালাও তেমনি চলি, সকলি তোমারি ইচ্ছা, ইচ্ছাময়ী তারা তুমি, তোমার কর্ম তুমি করো মা, লোকে বলে করিয়া আমি।
One more? Want to do one more? No? You sure?
One more.
Not one more. Maharaj says one more.
মনে চলে
মনে চলো, মনে চলো,
Swamiji's favorite and Thakur's favorite.
We're greedy today, sorry.
He's a wonderful voice.
Yeah, oh, isn't he amazing? We love having. Oh my golly.
মনে চলোটা অনেকদিন গাইনি মহারাজ, আমি
Okay,
অন্য
then
একটা গাই।
do whatever one you feel comfortable with.
ওকে, তাহলে এটা পুজোর সময় গেছিলাম, এটা বোধহয় মনে আছে ঠিক মতো, মা গো আনন্দময়ী।
বাহ, নিরানন্দ করো।
Let me see if I have a translation.
Yeah, I can look it up.
Sri Ramakrishna himself sang this song many times, and authentic translation is available on April 15th, 1883 in the Gospel. This is my simplified translation. I tried hard to avoid thou wouldest. So, oh blissful one, mother dear, dear mother, never deprive me of joy. Save the grace of your feet, my mind knows nothing else. Taking your holy name, O mother, this mortal realm I thought to enter. I never dreamt you would leave me drowning in this shoreless sea. Day and night I chant Durga's name, yet there is no end to my sorrows. If I die in these depths, none will remain, O beautiful one, to call your name. আনন্দময়ী নিরানন্দ করুণা আমার মন ও দুটি চরণ বিনে আমার মন কোনো কিছু আর জানে না মাগো আনন্দময়ী নিরানন্দ করুণা। ভবানী বলিয়ে ভবে যাব চলে মনে ছিল এই বাসনা। ভবানী বলিয়ে ভবে যাব চলে মনে ছিল এই বাসনা। অকুল পাথারে ডোবাবে আমারে অকুল পাথারে ডোবাবে আমারে স্বপ্নে তা তো জানি না মাগো আনন্দময়ী নিরানন্দ করুণা। অহর্নিশি শ্রী দুর্গা নামে ভাসি দুঃখ রাশি তবু গেল না। অহর্নিশি শ্রী দুর্গা নামে ভাসি দুঃখ রাশি তবু গেল না। আমি যদি মরি ও পর সুন্দরী আমি যদি মরি ও পর সুন্দরী দুর্গা নাম তো কেউ লবে না মাগো আনন্দময়ী নিরানন্দ করুণা। তোমারও দুটি চরণ বিনে আমার মন ও দুটি চরণ বিনে আমার মন কোনো কিছু আর জানে না মাগো আনন্দময়ী নিরানন্দ করুণা।
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you. I couldn't have thought a better way to start. Just put that.
What about the podium? No, he's gonna sit. Oh, yeah, okay.
Wouldn't make it comfortable.
Okay. Sure, it's good enough. Yeah, totally. Namaste, namaste.
So now, what you've all been waiting for?
Should I sit here or should
No.
Okay.
You're the man of honor. You sit there. Yeah. Do you want, this is a figurative table for you too.
This is, yeah, it's fine.
Okay.
We'll just leave it here. Does it need to be? This is fine.
It'll work.
Okay.
Is this okay for you?
Whatever is fine for audio, for online too.
Yeah. Perfect.
Great. Om Sthapakaya cha dharmasya sarva dharma swarupine avatara varishtaya Rama Krishnaya te Namah. Good evening, everyone. Nice to see you all again. After about 1 year, I guess.
I think so, my
So it's a pleasure to be here. Jeff is a wonderful host. And Bidur graced us with his wonderful singing. Thank you so much. But you have to learn a few more Rabindra Sangit songs so you can play them next time.
Sure.
Thank you. Okay, so today is meant to be an informal Q&A. So whatever questions you have, please feel free to ask.
You want to start with a little bit about your background, how you got to where you are today and all?
Okay, sure.
Yeah,
If
because
anyone cares.
we all do, right?
We all do.
Born and raised in Boston, Lexington, Massachusetts. Not born in Lexington, born in Boston. Raised in Lexington. Studied philosophy and English literature at Berkeley and Oxford. And did my doctoral work in German philosophy, especially German aesthetics. So some of the great German philosophers, Kant, Hegel, and so on. Spent a year in Germany as a Fulbright scholar, in Berlin. And raised Hindu, but not in this particular tradition. But I read Gita at about the age of 19 in translation for the first time. I learned Sanskrit later during my PhD. And it really resonated with me, especially two things really, especially, which is renunciation and this Vedantic idea that we are not the body-mind complex, but eternal spirit. So these two things, and that we realize our true spiritual nature through renunciation. So from reading the Gita, I was inspired to become a monk. And I'm a kind of a stubborn person, and my parents know that. So as soon as I decided that, I more or less told them. It was within one semester of grad school, I remember, about 23. And I told my parents, told my friends, told my supervisor, my doctoral supervisor, I'm going to finish my PhD, move to India, and be a sannyasi. And nobody believed me because I was very academically motivated. But I just knew that was my long-term plan. And that the PhD was part of the spiritual journey, actually. That's what they didn't get. If you want to be a monk, go now. But I said, no, this is part of the journey. So anyway, then as I continued grad school, my uncle, who has always been a devotee of Sri Aurobindo, I visited him in Pondicherry, and he took me to the VAK bookstore, V-A-K. It's a famous bookstore in Pondicherry. And he got me two books, Swami Vivekananda's Raja Yoga and a collection of Ramana Maharshi's teachings, Erase the Ego. And I read both of those, devoured both of those. And I loved both of them. And I liked Raja Yoga so much that I ordered the whole 9-volume complete works of Swami Vivekananda from Kolkata Advaita Ashrama. And the cost of the books was less than the cost of shipping to the US. Because the books are so cheap in India. And so during my PhD, I just read the whole 9 volumes. And my ideas about spiritual life, about monasticism, renunciation, became much clearer, more crystallized. And I also was reading the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. Slowly, thankfully in Boston, my parents dragged me to Bengali school on Sundays, Bangla school. So I learned how to read and write Bengali from a young age, from age 6 to about 12 or 13, I went to Bangla school. So I had the foundations to read Sri Ramakrishna's teachings in the original Bengali, very, very slowly and painfully, but I practiced every single day and I improved my Bangla that way. So I was reading Sri Ramakrishna's teachings, reading Swami Vivekananda's complete works, and feeling even more inspired to I don't want to say join the order, that would be jumping a few steps, but being a monk basically, in this tradition, the Ramakrishna Vivekananda tradition. Then I spent, as I said, 1 year in Germany during my doctoral research. Then I came back 2007. And I spent the last 2 years of my doctoral program finishing my thesis, but I also just knew I need to learn Sanskrit. And so I spent 4 semesters learning Sanskrit from scratch after learning German. And it was wonderful and it was transformative. And one great thing about the Sanskrit class at Berkeley, many of you probably don't know that it has over 120-year-old Sanskrit program, actually. It has a very old tradition of teaching Sanskrit from very early in the 1900s. So I studied with this wonderful teacher. Her name was Sally Goldman. She and her husband, Robert Goldman, they're both Sanskrit professors, and they co-authored a textbook called Devavani Praveshika, Introduction to the Sanskrit Language. You can get it through Motilal. So I was taught by the author of this textbook, so he's obviously an expert, and it was very good. And one of the great things they did was, it was 6 days a week. It was a very rigorous class, 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. in the morning. And most people are still sleeping. And another funny thing about the Sanskrit class is, on the first day, there were about 30 people. In fact, people who study the classics, which means Latin and Greek, there was a woman I knew from grad school. She studied Latin and Greek at Harvard as an undergraduate. And she told me that she was now doing her PhD in classics. And she said that the mecca for classic students is to study and learn Sanskrit because it's the most sophisticated and most difficult in some ways, challenging language out there. So she also enrolled in this class. Within a couple of weeks, she dropped out. And these are, brilliant people, brilliant students who already know Latin and Greek. So what happened in my class was, first few days, 30 students. Then within 2 weeks, 5 students. I was one of the 5, and I stuck with it for those 2 years. It was very, very rewarding. And one of the wonderful things about this class was she would have us memorize one inspiring verse, Sanskrit verse, and then recite it at the beginning of class. And they would pick these very spiritual verses. I still remember some of them, really wonderful ones. One is from Shanti Parvan, from the Mahabharata. Yatha kashtam chakashtam cha sameyatam mahodado sametyavam vyapeyatam tadvad bhuta samagamaha. It's a very beautiful verse, which means just as in a vast infinite ocean, 2 planks of wood, 2 planks of driftwood, happen to come into contact with each other, and then just as quickly go their own ways. Just so is the meeting and parting of living beings. These kinds of verses. Another really beautiful one, which I remember. This is a kind of, I don't think it's from a famous scripture, but it's very profound. Bho daridriya namastubhyam siddhom tatpasadataha pashyamyaham jagat sarvam namam pashyati kaschana. Which means, imagine a poor person and saying, "Oh poverty, I'm very grateful to you. I bow down to you. Why? By your grace, I have acquired magical powers. I can see the whole world, but not a soul sees me." See, this is like a beggar or a homeless person who people ignore him, but that person can see everything. So anyway, the Gayatri Mantra then was also very powerful to me. And then after my PhD, my parents were living in Calabasas, Southern California. So I was staying with them. I thought I should get their blessings before renouncing the world. And I stayed with them, and I told them, I bought a one-way ticket to India, and only then did they believe me that I was actually moving to India and being a monk, because I'd been warning them for years before that, but they didn't believe me. And then I found out online that there's a Vedanta Society of Southern California. There's a very senior Swami there, Medhanandaji. I'd never met a monk, any monk. In fact, there's a center in Berkeley, and I never set foot in that center as a doctoral student. My dad even asked me, he said, "You're so interested in Swami Vivekananda, why don't you visit the center?" And my arrogant response was, "I don't want to lower the ideal." Anybody I meet is going to fall short of Swamiji, so I may as well just get the heck out of here and go to India. I was also kind of fed up with the US at that point. I thought it was a land of Maya. I'm more balanced now after having spent 13 years. Oh, I don't want to jump the gun, but I spent 13 years in India. Anyway, but coming back to so I'm staying with my parents, Southern California. I decided, let me pay my respects to Swami before going to India. So I go to attend the Arati there, and then I meet the Swami and do pranams to him, and he asks about my background, and I just tell him I just finished my PhD, and this and that. I want to be a monk in India. And he was very excited. And then he looked at me and he said, I will give you Diksha, which means spiritual initiation. And I had my heart set on going to Belumad and getting initiated in India. And so I said, I was planning on getting initiated in India. He said, well, in India, it's a group affair. Getting initiated, you get initiated in batches, in groups of 50 or 100. Here, it'll be one-on-one. So he's trying to convince me to get initiation from him. And I still was kind of hesitating. I said, let me think about it. So I go home. And then I spoke to my uncle about it. He said, are you crazy? A senior Swami is offering to give you initiation. He's a disciple of Vedanta, who's a direct disciple of Sri Ramakrishna. You shouldn't hesitate. And your birthday is coming up. This is early August. Birthday is August 24th. And so he said, why don't you ask him to give initiation on your birthday? And now looking back, I was thinking this is not the right, you shouldn't even ask a Swami like that to give you initiation. But I did, not knowing protocols and all that. And he agreed, graciously. So my birthday has become also my second birth, my spiritual second birth. And he initiated me graciously on my birthday in his own room, one-on-one, which is a great blessing for me. But then he threw a curveball at me right after initiating me and said, so I know you want to join in India and all that, but see, you were born and raised here in the US. You might have difficulty adjusting there. So better to join here under me. I'll send you to India, and if you have any difficulties, I can call you back because you'll be my man. Anyone who's met Swahanaji will know. He has this kind of way of speaking. My man, with his fist. And now he's my guru. How do you say no to your guru? Even though you already bought the one-way ticket with your hard-earned money. Okay, anyway. So I said, okay, but reluctantly. And then the saga continues. So technically I joined, in Hollywood, even though I had absolutely no interest in doing that. I think that lasted all of about a few hours or one day. I don't remember the time period. And I didn't even move into the ashrama. I went back to my parents' house. And then I came for Arati either that same day, I think it must have been the same day, I don't know. In any case, it was a very, very brief period of time when I technically had joined in Hollywood. And after coming out of the ashrama in Hollywood, there are these two benches. So I was sitting on one of these benches looking very pensive and sort of like things are not going right. And a very kind-looking elderly gentleman wearing dress, slacks and a dress shirt, tucked-in dress shirt. So I thought it was an elderly devotee with glasses, Indian, sitting next to me on the bench. And he looked at me and he said, you look very concerned about something. Do you want to talk about it? And I'm very free, and so I just started telling him, even though I didn't know who he was. And so I said everything. And then he said, let me tell you my own story of joining the order. And this person turned out to be Medhanandaji, the current head of the Hollywood Center, the one who took over after Swamiji left his body. And at the time, he wasn't wearing gerua because I think Swamiji didn't encourage that. And so I was really surprised. And then I asked him, I said, what do you recommend that I do? And he said, you should follow your heart. And then I went back to Swahanandaji and said, Maharaj, my heart is set on joining in India. And I want your blessings. And this is the greatness of Swahanandaji, is that he was so grand, He immediately was very supportive and inspiring and said, I understand, you want your freedom. And I told him I want to do a 6-month pilgrimage in India before joining anywhere. And so he generously wrote a letter to all Swamis in India. Please allow Brahmachari Ayam to remain in your ashrama for up to 3 nights. And he printed out a hard copy, signed it, and I took that with me. And then I moved to India, and I carried that letter with me, and it opened all sorts of doors, unexpectedly. Not just within the Ramakrishna Mission, but outside the Ramakrishna Mission, he was known. I stayed in the Divine Life Society in Rishikesh for 3 weeks with that letter. Tiruvannamalai, Ramanashrama for a couple of nights, and Sringeri. I mean, all sorts of places. So he was really very, very gracious to me, initiating me, writing that letter, keeping in touch with me after I moved to India, sending me books of his, and just keeping in touch by email. He was wonderful. And he left his body just a few years. I joined in 2010, and he left his body in 2012. But in the meantime, yeah. So I decided after the 6-month pilgrimage, I decided to join in the Vivekananda University, a very new university, which had been founded in 2006. So I was the first brahmachari to join at this university because it's brand new. And I joined as a professor of philosophy and head of the philosophy program there. And one of the best things about it is that it's just 5 minutes from Beluma, which is the global headquarters of the Ramakrishna order. So I got the best of both worlds, the academic side at the university, and I would be doing my karma yoga at the university, and going 2 or 3 times a day to Beluma, morning meditation at 4 in the morning, and again, evening arati. And a third time, you know what the third time that I would go to Beluma was for? I just come from the US, and I cannot eat spicy food. And at the university, we had a Bihari cook, a cook from Bihar, and they're famous for making oily, spicy food. And I just couldn't eat it. And I told Apapiyananda, the head of our center, I said, I can't eat this food. Yeah. Immediately, he called Girisharamji, who was the manager of Vedanta at the time. He said, he just came from the US. Can you make arrangements for him to sit in the pangat? Pangat means the cafeteria with hundreds of sadhus sitting together on the floor. He said, just make a space for him every day, and he'll walk over and eat with you. And he made the arrangement. So every day I had the great good fortune of eating prasad, taking lunch prasad with hundreds of sadhus in Beluma for several years. It was so fortunately I couldn't eat any spice, because that was the reason why I was able to eat in Beluma every day. And then of course I spent 2 years in training center in Beluma, and then came back to the university. So 11 years, fully 11 years were spent at the university in Beluma. And then for a change of pace, I spent 1.5 years in Mysore ashrama. And I changed my academic field to some extent, away from German philosophy to Indian philosophy, and Vedanta and our tradition especially. So I've written some books on Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda. And I'm about to finish a book on karma and rebirth in Hinduism. And my next book will be on Sri Aurobindo's philosophy. So the books on Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda are the first 2 books in what I'm calling my integral Advaita trilogy of books. It's a trilogy of books making a sustained case that these 3 figures, Sri Ramakrishna, Swami Vivekananda, and Sri Aurobindo, developed a new school of integral Advaita philosophy within this tradition of Vedantic thought. So it's a new school. What do I mean by integral Advaita? It's a non-dual philosophy that accepts the reality of everything as divine. That it's an Advaita that doesn't exclude anything. So it's different from Shankara's Advaita Vedanta, which is Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya. Brahman alone is real. This world of names and forms is unreal. The personal God is also ultimately non-existent. Integral Advaita is, as Sri Ramakrishna would say in Bangla, Shob Joriya Akti. It's an all-encompassing oneness. It's a oneness that accepts everything. And it's from the standpoint of Vijnana. He had this very special spiritual experience of Vijnana. And he would say, Vijnani dake Brahmo Choturbinshi Tattva hoiche. Which means the Vijnani sees that Brahman has become the 24 cosmic principles. There's nothing but the divine. And so the first book on Sri Ramakrishna is called Infinite Paths to Infinite Reality, Sri Ramakrishna and Cross-Cultural Philosophy of Religion. Second book is called Swami Vivekananda's Vedantic Cosmopolitanism, both published by Oxford University Press. And the third book is on Sri Aurobindo, is under contract with Oxford. And I'll be working on that right after this book on karma and rebirth comes out. That'll be published by Cambridge. So stay tuned. And okay, so any questions? I've talked a lot. Yes. Vincent, yes, nice to see you again.
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
I'm surprised you remember my name.
Oh, how can I forget?
This is a I'm sorry to say this is a personal request.
Go ahead.
I don't know if this is proper or not, but you know what? Maybe I should ask you afterwards.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead. No problem.
So I have a copy of Infinite Paths, and I was wondering if you would autograph it for me.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, no problem. I
Okay.
get this
So that's-
request all the
that's-
time. No worries.
That's just a very selfish request.
Yeah, no problem. Done, and done.
Deal.
Yeah. So anyone else? Are you enjoying the book? Have you cracked it open?
I've cracked it open.
A lot of people have bought the book. Very few have opened it.
So I purchased the book. I've cracked it open. It's a progress because I'm reading other things as well. But I heard you mention Hegel.
Yeah.
And I recently purchased. I don't remember the author's name. He wrote a book on Hegel, and I'm curious about many philosophers, Hegel and a few others. And I was curious as to what you thought about Hegel.
He was one of my main areas of research during my PhD at Berkeley.
Hegel was.
Yeah. And I see, I love Hegel, and I see Sri Aurobindo as a kind of spiritual Hegel in a way.
Okay.
Hegel is famous for his extremely difficult German, and he would write these very long sentences. And Sri Aurobindo is also famous for his very difficult English. And more deeply, content-wise, Hegel. Have you read any of Hegel's work?
So I haven't.
Yeah.
I've read some of Kant.
Yeah.
But not Hegel.
Okay, so if you want a taste of Hegel, you can look at one of his early works called Phenomenology of Spirit, 1807. And it's very spiritual actually, because it's like this adventure of the way that what he calls absolute spirit with a capital S, absolute Geist, manifests in this world and as this world.
So he talks about the way it manifests.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's what I was
In the
gonna
course
ask
of
you.
human history.
Oh, okay.
And so that's why, and Sri Aurobindo is doing the same thing, except from a spiritual standpoint, explaining how spirit, and he calls it the divine or spirit, progressively manifests in the course of human evolution, not just human evolution, but the evolution of this world. And what Sri Aurobindo says that evolution hasn't completed yet. We're at the level of mind, but that eventually humanity will progress to the stage of supermind, what he calls supermind.
Okay. So
So there's similarities, but Hegel is not very spiritual, frankly.
And that was going to be my question about Hegel. It's his spirituality.
Yeah, he sort of gets stuck at the intellectual level, in my opinion. Vernunft, for reason, that's the German term for reason. But he doesn't. He wasn't open to the possibility of the supersensuous, like some kind of supersensuous knowledge, supersensuous intuition, knowledge beyond the senses, beyond the intellect. That was something that he didn't seem to be open to. So he rejected the idea of what other philosophers called intellectual intuition and spiritual intuition, these kind of things. Yeah. So there's a lot there to the question that we can go and talk about.
No, absolutely. No, that was.
That's the
thank you
start.
very much.
Yeah, sure. Yes, we do.
So Sri Ramakrishna, in the Gospel, we find that he used to dissuade some of his followers not to read too many high philosophy books.
Yeah.
And concentrate more on what I believe is bhakti. Bhakti
Yeah,
related,
correct.
you know. So I like reading.
Mm.
And does it confuse me? Yes, it does sometimes, you know. But in the light of what Sri Ramakrishna said, what is good for me?
Yeah, well, I don't know you, so I don't know. I can't tell you what's good for you. But I'll say a few general things. It's true that Sri Ramakrishna will often say things like, he says, if you've come to a mango orchard, don't waste all your time counting how many leaves there are and this and that. Amkau, eat the mangoes, for goodness sakes. That's the point of coming to the mango orchard, right? Which means dive deep in your spiritual practice, try to realize God. There are a few things here. One is, he would say again and again that in this Kali Yuga, now I know Jeff belongs to a tradition that dates things differently. And so I think they don't, this is not the Kali Yuga, according to, it's the Treta, or which
Dwapara,
one?
Dwapara.
Dwapara Yuga. Okay, but in our tradition at least,
Mhm.
Sri Ramakrishna would repeatedly say that this is the Kali Yuga. And that's this, I think, the mainstream Hindu view, at least. In this Kali Yuga, because we're so body conscious, so identified with the body, onnogata prana, it's very hard to translate that. Maybe you could, because you're an interesting translator, a creative translator, you can come up with some. Well, how would you translate onnogata prana, or any of you, really? It's very difficult. I mean, because Nikalamji does it in a very literal way, that it's like in this age, we're very dependent on food, which just sounds odd. I think Thakur is saying something even more profound and deep. So I think the implication is that we're very, very profoundly identified with the body. As a result, the best path for most people is bhakti. Bhakti yoga is the yuga dharma. It's the spiritual practice most suited for our age. That doesn't mean that everybody should practice bhakti. That wouldn't be in keeping with his liberality. But for most people, bhakti is probably should be the nucleus of our spiritual practice, and then the other ones can be the electrons and protons floating around it, other practices. So that's part of it. And what he would warn against often was the practice of Advaita Vedanta. He says it in many places, and I gave a talk recently, a few months ago, at Hollywood called "The Radiant Light Within," where I quote Sri Ramakrishna saying in the Gospel. He says, "Those who have body consciousness and try to practice Shankara's Advaita Vedanta will fall flat on their face. Nijike tokai or unnatake tokai means you deceive yourself and you deceive others." And we literally see that happening. It's called Neo-Advaita. There's a whole movement called Neo-Advaita. And I did a 2-hour podcast interview with Rick Archer, who does this famous, or this well-known spiritual podcast called Buddha at the Gas Pump. And he started an entire organization. I forgot the name of it, but it's called like something like an organization for ethical Advaita or something like that. Like the idea is that he's seeing all of these so-called Advaitins in the name of Ramana Maharshi, these great saints, throwing ethical prerequisites and spiritual practice out the window and saying, we're already liberated. That's the point of Ramana's teachings. And in fact, I experienced this firsthand during my 6-month pilgrimage. One of my stops before I joined the order was Kodaikanal, which is a beautiful hill station in Tamil Nadu, I think. And I walked into a bakery to order something, and the baker there, who I think she was the owner, a middle-aged woman. I was wearing this kind of clothes except white, because I was a brahmachari at the time. And she said, "Oh, what are you going to do?" I said, "I'm going to join the Ramakrishna order and be a monk." She said, "Oh, why go to all that trouble? I'm a follower of Ramana Maharshi. And he said you should just dive into the Atman. So why don't you just dive into the Atman? You don't have to go into all that trouble, the trouble of renouncing and this and that. It's very simple. You're already liberated." So anyway, Neo-Advaita. I think Thakur, Sri Ramakrishna, back in the 19th century, he anticipated this. He recognized the dangers of Advaita and how easy it is to deceive yourself into thinking that you're making progress, but you're actually going nowhere fast. And I experienced that in my own life, because I told you that in grad school, I read the whole complete works, the 9 volumes. And I devoured it, and I was a philosophy student, right? And so I'm very intellectually top-heavy, you can say. Spiritual life for me was all intellectual. And so Shankara was very, very appealing to me at the time. So I was an agnostic, and then what converted me away from agnosticism was Shankara's Advaita. So I'm very grateful to Shankara for that, because it gave me this very rationally satisfying spiritual philosophy. You don't have to believe in God. I was not a bhakta at all when I first came to spiritual life. So I was a Shankarite. And in fact, to the point where when Swahanaji kind of strong-armed me into joining in Hollywood, he immediately gave me the form, the joining form, on day 1. And it said religion. And I wrote Advaita Vedanta, and I handed it to him. And he goes, "You have to write Hinduism." I said, "I'm not a Hindu, I'm an Advaita." So that's the kind of Advaita I was. And then I come to India. I join at the university. I'm still a follower of Shankara. And what I found was it's very easy to talk about Advaita and almost impossible to practice it. If you're sincere, you'll realize that you can't really practice it if you have even a trace of body consciousness. And I realized that again and again. In moments when it really mattered, Advaita flew out the window. And so I found that I was deceiving myself, deceiving others. Exactly what Sri Ramakrishna said, I found was coming true. And two other factors converged at the same time. At just the first few years of joining at the university, as a new joining in novitiate, I'm reading the gospel every single day in the Bengali, Kautamrita. And I'm not able to match Sri Ramakrishna's teachings with Shankara's. His teachings are much vaster. He does not just limit ultimate reality to Nirguna Brahman, to just non-dual, impersonal, pure consciousness. Again and again he says, Brahma Shakti Abhed. Brahman and Shakti are inseparable, like fire and its power to burn. Shankara will never accept that. He didn't accept it. He denied the ultimate reality of Shakti. If you read his commentaries, almost nobody does, unfortunately, but read Shankara's commentaries, especially his commentary on the Brahma Sutra, and you'll find that he says this very clearly. So that's another factor, is that, well, I'm a monk of the Ramakrishna order, I love Sri Ramakrishna, and yet what he says is much vaster than what Shankara is teaching. Third thing, I'm studying the Sanskrit scriptures, Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita, Brahma Sutra, in the original Sanskrit, and looking at Shankara's commentaries, looking at other commentaries, and again, I'm finding that when it comes to passages where there's bhakti, where there's Shakti, Saguna Brahman, where this world is talked about, Sarvam Kalvidam Brahma, everything is Brahman, I find that Shankara's commentaries are text torture. He's forcing these scriptures to say things that they're not really saying. And that was my opinion. So these three factors converge. As a sadhaka and as a monk, I'm finding that Shankara's philosophy is not practicable for people with body consciousness like myself. Second, Sri Ramakrishna's teachings are much vaster than just Shankara. You can't force Sri Ramakrishna's teachings into the Shankara box. He's much vaster, much too vast for that, much too universal, and much more liberal. And thirdly, the Vedantic scriptures, Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita, Brahma Sutra, they can't be perfectly explained from the standpoint of Shankara. So eventually I moved away from Shankara's Advaita to Sri Ramakrishna's philosophy, what I take to be Sri Ramakrishna's philosophy, which I call Vijnana Vedanta. And it's a spiritual philosophy that accepts the spiritual core of Shankara's Advaita, Ramanuja's Vishtadvaita, Madhva's Dvaita Vedanta, Tantra, Vaishnavism. Not just that, that's all within Hinduism. Accepts all the world religions and places them on an equal footing. And it was very empowering when I moved away from that, from Shankara to this broader spiritual philosophy taught by Sri Ramakrishna, Vijnana Vedanta, because it doesn't reject anything. So it's not that I stopped, that I rejected Shankara, but I accepted something broader than Shankara, which allowed me to accept all the different spiritual and religious traditions of the world. And coming to your question about bhakti versus jnana and all that, Vijnana Vedanta says all four yogas can take you to the highest goal directly. Bhakti yoga, karma yoga, jnana yoga, raja yoga. And it's really a matter of your temperament, your preferences. And so you can, and ideally you should try to combine all four of those yogas into your day-to-day spiritual life. Try to practice them at the same time. That's something that none of the traditional Vedantic acharyas would teach. Shankara places jnana yoga on a higher footing than the other yogas. And he says that the same spiritual aspirant should not, at one and the same time, practice bhakti and jnana and karma. That's a no-no. It'll create total confusion and you'll go nowhere. So jnana yoga, the path of knowledge, is meant for superior spiritual aspirants. This is Shankara's view. And bhakti yoga and karma yoga are meant for inferior spiritual aspirants who have impure minds. But the same spiritual aspirant should not and cannot practice bhakti and jnana at the same time. But Vijnana Vedanta says you can practice all four at the same time. But with the caveat that there's a different way of practicing jnana yoga. You have to tweak jnana yoga a little bit. That's what I explain in my Radiant Light Within lecture. If you're interested, we can talk about that. So the way that a Vijnana Vedanta and a follower of Sri Ramakrishna should practice jnana yoga is as follows. Number one is it's more aligned to Ramanuja's jnana yoga. Ramanuja has a jnana yoga. He was a great bhakta, okay? But what he said was, you have to practice jnana yoga before you're eligible to practice bhakti yoga. He turns the tables on Shankara, actually. Shankara says bhakti yoga is a preparatory discipline for qualifying to practice the path of knowledge. Ramanuja reverses that and says, practice jnana yoga first, and then you can become eligible to practice bhakti. What did he mean by jnana yoga? What he meant is, jnana yoga is a practice of constantly meditating on your true spiritual nature as a jivatma, an eternal soul, an immaterial eternal soul separate from the body-mind complex. This is Jnana Yoga. And he says, why is that a prerequisite for bhakti? Until you realize that you are a soul separate from the body-mind complex, that you are a spark of the divine fire, you can never have true bhakti for God. So long as you mistakenly identify with the body, so long as you even mistakenly identify with the mind, you can't feel true bhakti for God, true longing for God. You can only feel true longing for God when you identify with that deeper soul nature. Because it's that deeper soul which is a spark of God and which has a natural bhakti for God. That natural child of God within us is that soul. So through Jnana Yoga, that's really what the Gita teaches. You are not the body, you are not the mind, you are the jiva, you are the atman, you are the atma. That's the eternal soul. So that's Jnana Yoga. Okay. In that sense, we should feel free to practice Jnana Yoga. What Sri Ramakrishna warns against is Shankara's specific brand of Jnana Yoga, because it's pitched at too high a level for most people. It's telling us that Nirguna Brahman alone is real, which means that this impersonal Brahman alone is real, which puts the personal God on a lower footing, saying that this personal God is unreal. This whole world of names and forms, unreal. How is it helpful to householders who have a spouse and have kids and have a 9-to-5 job? How is it helpful? It's not, frankly, if you're honest with yourself. But this other kind of Jnana Yoga, Ramanuja's kind of Jnana Yoga, is something that Sri Ramakrishna himself taught. In one place in the Gospel, he says, he brings in the 6 chakras. And he says that worldly people, their consciousness is at these 3 lower levels, right up to the belly button. Organ of generation, organ of evacuation, and the navel. And he says, the struggle, the most important struggle in spiritual life for most spiritual aspirants is to elevate the consciousness from the lower 3 centers and to bring it up to the heart center, the heart chakra. And he says, once consciousness is elevated to the heart center, what happens? He says, the sadhaka says, eki, jivatma darshan hoy, shikhar nei, jivatma darshan hoy, ar jyoti darshan hoy. So what that means is, the sadhaka, the spiritual aspirant, when the consciousness is elevated to the heart level, it realizes the jivatma, the individual soul, in the shape of a flame. He gives a very precise spiritual phenomenology here. In the shape of a flame, you realize that you're an eternal soul separate from the body-mind complex, and you have a vision of light. And the sadhaka says, "What is this? What is this?" The sadhaka is literally awestruck, wonderstruck, because for so many lifetimes we've been identifying with the body-mind. For the first time, you realize that you are an eternal soul separate from the body-mind complex. That is that's the culmination of Ramanuja's Jnana Yoga practice. Ramanuja calls it Atma Avalokanam. You realize yourself as an eternal soul, as the Atman separate from the body-mind complex. And only then, Sri Ramakrishna says, can you go on to the higher centers, which means the throat center, where you can think and talk of nothing but God. Between the eyebrows, you realize the personal God. And then the Sahasrara, the 1,000-petal lotus, which is like the salt doll melting in the ocean. You merge in non-dual pure consciousness. He accepts everything. That's the beauty of Sri Ramakrishna. And the Vijnani, he says, shuttles back and forth between the 1,000-petal lotus and the personal God, the realm of the personal God. So that's the uniqueness of the Vijnani. After realizing non-dual pure consciousness, the Vijnani can come back to this relative plane and see everything as God's Leela, not as unreal, but as Mojakuti. This entire world is a blissful manifestation of the divine. It's a long answer to your question, but sorry.
Sounds like the process. I'm sorry. I was
Go ahead.
just making a comment.
Yeah.
It sounded like something to me, that's all.
What did it sound like?
Being able to observe without evaluating,
Yeah,
to look at things without
Yeah.
evaluating it, to see everything.
as it is, without
Absolutely.
the value judgments. Yeah. You find that in Buddhism as well. The mindfulness practice in Buddhism is non-judgmental awareness. But usually it's what's happening at the level of body-mind, your feelings. we get caught when we start judging ourselves and judging others, right? So if you can take the judgment out of it, it's so freeing, right? But yeah, the same thing can be said from a bhakti standpoint, actually. So that's right. Yeah. Oh, remind me of your name.
Risha. It's actually my first time.
Oh, okay. So good.
Mhm.
I don't feel guilty then. Okay.
Yeah, no problem. But I've been following you for some time, so maybe there's some connection.
Great.
But thank you very much for coming out here. I really appreciate
Thank you.
it. I'm looking forward to meeting you, especially because I've been sort of straddling between Sri Aurobindo and Bhakti stuff as well. So to find
Right.
someone like you who's right in there as well is
Right.
Someone,
Between Sri Aurobindo and Shankara's Advaita, is that?
yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Specifically, I came across Vedanta through Swami through.
Sure, of course. Many people do, yeah. Yeah.
So
And then they end up confused. Well, I'm saying when they watch me and watch him, often they're like, well, they get whiplash.
that's where I am. That's where I was going with this.
Yeah.
So yeah, basically, I'm wrestling in there in between those, and so I just have questions that I'm not even sure how to
Articulate.
if they're quite correct.
Yeah.
I'm thinking specifically. This is sort of piggybacking up what we were just discussing. There was a discourse where you gave a great example, I thought, of something where there was, I believe, some chameleon-like creature.
Yeah.
That's I think default is a clear or blank, but then it also has a variety of colors, and it depended on when someone was passing by. They might catch a different glance, but it's really the same entity that's been there all along.
Mhm.
My question is, at a more subtle level, I think that you had explained this, that the default setting is blank, and I was wondering, does that mean, well, first of all, is this supposed to be analogous to Nirguna Sattva Brahman, or and then whether whether the default setting, if that is one, is the if that's supposed to be, I guess, is that a more pure expression than the other multivariate colors? Yeah.
Right. Okay, that's a great question. So I don't know whether people online can hear the questions. Any idea?
Yeah.
They
Yeah,
can?
they can.
Because there's no mic, but they can still hear?
Yeah. it's-
Okay, so I don't need to repeat it?
No.
Okay, all right.
Well,
Did you
actually, on that one, you might want
Okay,
to,
let me
just
just,
because it's
okay,
quite.
so this
complex.
gentleman watched a lot of Samarthanji's lectures on Shankara's Advaita and was watching my lectures on Vijnana Vedanta and is a little confused, and confused also between Sri Aurobindo on the one hand and Shankara on the other. And he asked a question about the chameleon parable that Sri Ramakrishna teaches. Did you watch my talk at Harvard, which I gave a few months ago?
I think it was earlier this year where you did this. I'm not sure if it was Harvard.
Okay, because I talk about the chameleon in the context of the harmony of religion and stuff. So there, what I say, and what I'll just emphasize here again, reiterate, is this. Here's how I understand the chameleon parable. I don't think it makes any sense to think that the colorless chameleon is somehow more real or more authentic or more fundamental than the yellow chameleon or the red chameleon or the green chameleon. I don't think that that's implied by the analogy at all, by the parable. What's important about the parable is the difference between two kinds of epistemic standpoint. Okay, one is the person who happens to walk by and sees the chameleon at a particular point in time, right? Either as colorless, or as yellow, or as red, or as green, or as blue, right? Whatever the color happens to be at the time. But there's a very unique individual who's different from all those casual passersby. Who is that person? The person sitting under the tree. That's the striking person, the unusual person. This is the person who sees the chameleon 24 hours a day, the tree sitter, the tree hugger, the tree activist. He's there all day, 24/7, and sees the chameleon as colorless, as red, as yellow, as green, as blue. Who is that person? The Vigya. This is the person who has a more expansive knowledge of the divine. Sri Ramakrishna, after realizing Mother as divine consciousness, remember his first ecstatic spiritual experience was waves of consciousness engulfed him, and he lost external consciousness. He comes back and says, Mother, Mother. And you think that's the end of his spiritual practice? No, it's the beginning. And he described himself as a glutton in the spiritual field. He'd say, Mother, now I want you to reveal yourself to me as Allah, as Krishna, as Sita, as Rama, as Hanuman. It just goes on, as non-dual pure consciousness. He couldn't get enough. That's the Vigya. Okay, so now this chameleon parable, I think, very clearly shows that Nirguna Brahman is not ontologically, in some sense, more fundamental or superior or ultimately more true than the forms of the personal God. What's another parable Sri Ramakrishna uses to prove the same point? Because here's the key. Never take Sri Ramakrishna's teachings in isolation. If you do that, you're going to be doing an injustice to Sri Ramakrishna. Okay? So another parable and analogy that helps to clarify what he means in the chameleon parable is the analogy of the infinite ocean. He says, imagine an infinite ocean, liken that to the divine Satchidananda. Okay? Infinite existence, consciousness, bliss. He says, under the cooling influence of the gentle breeze of bhakti, that ocean forms into ice at different places. Each of those forms of ice, and they have different shapes. Each of those corresponds to some form of the personal God. One is Krishna, one is Ganesha, one is Kali, one is Christ, and so on and so forth. Okay? Then the analogy goes on. With the rising of the sun of knowledge, Ganshuchu, these ice forms melt. Now the Shankarites will be very happy. Vindicated. The formless ocean is the higher truth than these forms. The ice forms melt. Sri Ramakrishna was a Shankarite. Wonderful. Except there's a catch. The parable goes on. The analogy continues. He says, but in some places the ice doesn't melt at all. It becomes like quartz, sputikerakar. Nitya shakar. Nitya sakara. In some places you get these eternal forms of the personal God, which never melt, which are never sublated by some higher realization of Nirguna Brahma. This is where the Shankarites get in trouble. They can't explain that. They won't accept it. I mean, Orthodox Shankarites. You see. And then Sri Ramakrishna will, there's another place in the gospel when Mohima Chakraborty, who's a follower of Shankara, so he believes that the highest is Nirguna Brahman, this non-dual, impersonal, pure consciousness. Personal God is, it's fine, but it's lower. So he comes to Sri Ramakrishna with a very, very loaded question. He says, Bhaktaro kintu nirvana chaito, na? He says, but bhaktas also ultimately need to attain the state of nirvana. And nirvana here is not the Buddhist nirvana, it's Advaitic nirvana. Dissolution of the individuality in non-dual pure consciousness. Salto, melting in the ocean. And he wants Sri Ramakrishna to vindicate the Shankarite position. But what does Sri Ramakrishna says? Tanoi. No, it's not that. In some traditions, Nitya Krishna, Nitya Bhakta, Chinmay Sham, Chinmay Dham. There's Nitya Krishna, the eternal Krishna, and there are his eternal Bhaktas, Nitya Bhakta. There is Chinmay Sham, there is Krishna as consciousness embodied. And there is Chinmay Dham, which means his Dhamma, the Vaikuntha Loka, this Goloka, Vrindavana, is also eternal, and it's made of the same divine consciousness. What does that mean? It means, let's say you attain liberation in this life, okay? And then you leave your physical body. What happens to you? According to Shankara's Advaita Vedanta, what happens is, you just are non-dual Brahman. He doesn't believe in any eternal heavens and all those things, right? What Sri Ramakrishna says is, that's one paradigm of liberation, but there's also a devotional paradigm of liberation. And he calls them by two different names, using a very beautiful and charming metaphor. The two paradigms are either becoming sugar or eating sugar. And he says, bhaktas don't want to become sugar, they want to eat sugar. So now, becoming sugar is this no coming and going, I just am non-dual pure consciousness. Eating sugar is what Sri Ramakrishna talks about when he says, Chinmoy Sham, Chinmoy Dham. There are eternal lokas. There are eternal realms. Eternal heavens, if you want to call them that. But they're eternal, they're not temporary. In which liberated bhaktas can dwell with their beloved form of the personal God for an eternity, lovingly worshipping and serving that God. For devotees of Sri Ramakrishna, we call it Ramakrishna Loka. For devotees of Krishna, it's Goloka or Vrindavana. For worshippers of Vishnu, it's Vaikuntha Loka, and so on and so forth. For Christians, Christian heaven. For Muslims, it's called Jannah, but it's the Muslim heaven. And for them, you don't force them to then become sugar. They don't want to become sugar. They want to eat sugar. So let them eat sugar. Why are you bothered? So that's the beauty of Sri Ramakrishna's philosophy, is that it's much more expansive. It doesn't put down other paths. It accepts all practitioners and all paths. And it doesn't put non-dual Nirguna Brahman on a higher footing, philosophically or spiritually, than the personal God. Does that make sense?
Can I follow up?
Of course.
And I'm not sure if you got this in the later part, but would the I think rebuttal to that be that, let's say in the extension of the example where the ice turns into quartz, right? I think that's what it is. So ultimately, that doesn't the quartz also disintegrate?
Well, no, that's exactly not the point. But Sri Ramakrishna will say literally, Nitya Shakar. You don't know Bengali, do you? Okay, Nitya Shakar. The Sanskrit there is Nitya Sakara. Eternal form. That's literally what it means. There's no question of disintegration for something that's eternal, right? Sri Ramakrishna is explicitly refuting the position that he's saying in some places the ice never melts. Does that make sense? So now that's exactly how Sri Ramakrishna's Vijnanaveda contrasts with Shankara's, because Shankara will admit a temporary Brahmaloka. It's called Brahmaloka. He'll say, yeah, you that's great. You go to your Brahmaloka, you hang out there, call it the spiritual Best Western. and you spend a few millennia there, however long, enjoy your personal God to your heart's content, but sorry, it's not an eternal Best Western.
Yeah.
It's you eventually need to become sugar again. You have to be the salt on milk in the ocean. No, you don't need to. It's eternal. No disintegration. I think what's difficult for you is you've been conditioned by the Shankarite framework, so you're used to thinking of heaven as something that's temporary. But that's why I'm saying it's so important to recognize where Sri Ramakrishna differs from Shankara. All these great saints don't all teach the same thing. That's what I call lazy harmonizing. What Shankara taught is exactly what Ramanuja taught. That's also exactly what Madhva taught. That's also what Sri Ramakrishna taught. Nonsense. No, they're all realized. Nobody's denying that they realize God. But look at the blind man and the elephant example. Each of the blind men is touching the elephant. Definitely touching it. That's realization. It's direct experiential contact. And yet, their experience of the same elephant is completely different. The one touching the tail says the elephant's furry. The one touching the trunk says the elephant is dry. And now notice there's one person who's not blind who sees the whole elephant. Vijnana. Exactly like the man sitting under the tree. That's Sri Ramakrishna. Whereas the person touching one part, Shankara, another part, Ramanuja, another part, Madhva, another part, Christian, another part, Muslim. The Vijnani sees a bigger picture. That's the difference. So he can accept everybody. But you can never limit Sri Ramakrishna to just one school because of that. Does that clarify the issue? Yeah, great. Thank you. Thanks for the questions. Other questions? Please, tell me your name.
I'm Marina. I watched your talk, I think it was last weekend, Vedanta as meta-religion.
Meta-religion, yeah.
Yes, and I had 3 short questions, and they may actually be the same question or have the same answer. So I'm just gonna fire them off.
Interesting.
Yeah, so you described Vedanta as a second order religion.
Religion, yes.
Is it necessary to have a first order religion from a personal perspective? And the second question is...
Hold on. Let's take them one at a time. I think it's better.
Okay.
I think it's better that way. Because these are interesting questions.
You want to
That's
repeat?
I'm going to repeat the question. The question is, in my talk in Hollywood last week, which was called Vedanta as meta-religion, not in the sense of Mark Zuckerberg's meta, but in the sense of, as you said, Vedanta as a second-order religion, which is the philosophical and spiritual foundation for the practice of any first-order spiritual or religious path or tradition. So you can be a second-order Vedantan and a first-order Christian. Second-order Vedantan, first-order Muslim. Second-order Vedantan, first-order Buddhist, and so on. That's the idea. Okay, and your question was, sorry, I already forgot.
So is it necessary to have this first
Thank you.
order
That's a very interesting question.
For a person?
Right. Can you just be a second-order Vedantan and just not have a first-order spiritual tradition or practice? And my answer is, okay, let me clarify how I understood the second-order religion of Vedanta, and then that'll go toward answering the question. So I see it as having a few key doctrines. Number one, ultimate reality is infinite and illimitable. And impersonal in one aspect, personal in another aspect, with form, without form, and much more besides. That's the first fundamental doctrine. So yes, you can believe that doctrine. In fact, you should believe that doctrine. Okay. But why is it helpful to have a first order religion in practice? Because of this Hindu concept of Ishta Devata. Okay. Which means what? I know that God is infinite and illimitable. And yet, as the gopis say, look, I know that Krishna is infinite and takes so many forms, but I still love my blue Krishna. Each one of us has our blue Krishna. You see. Why? Because we've lived many times in the past worshiping God in a particular way. And so we've cultivated for many, many lifetimes certain samskaras, latent mental impressions, which are stored in our unconscious. And so when we're presented with a range of deities, as we are here in many other places, we just feel instinctively drawn toward one form in particular. Often, most of the time. Which means what? To deepen our practice and to enrich our spiritual practice, we need to have a first order practice that lets us, encourages us to, and empowers us to specifically worship God in the form that we love. We know that God is infinite and illimitable, which is the second order plank, right? And yet, we love to think of that infinite, illimitable divine in a particular form. Or as the formless but personal God, as the Sikhs do and as the Muslims do. That's fine too, we're Brahma Samaj followers, right? Rabindranath Tagore, Devanath Tagore, they love to think of God as personal but formless. That's another possibility. Or there's a particular, but the moment you say that, you're already committed to a first order claim. Do you see what I mean? So that's why it's useful to have, and in most cases, I think essential in a way, to deepen the practice, to have a first order commitment as well, just at that level. Okay, then another plank of the second order religion of Vedanta would be in terms of spiritual practices. All four of the yogas can take you to the highest goal directly, okay? Which is great, and it's very empowering. In practice, though, what happens is each person will find that one yoga is their strength. They're just better at it. They're more drawn to it. Their go-to yoga is, it could be the Bhakti yoga, it could be the Jnana yoga, it could be the Karma yoga, it could be the Raja yoga if they love meditation, for instance. One of them more than the others. So in practice, at the first order level, what happens is, for most people, one yoga will be, I'm using the metaphor of physics, old physics, particle physics, nucleus. One yoga will be the nucleus. The other yogas will hover around them, that main yoga. So do you see? Whereas the second order religion is not teaching that kind of, it's saying all four can take you, right? But in practice, at the first order level, what you're going to find if you analyze yourself, one of those yogas is going to be fundamental or central, and then the other ones are going to be kind of subordinate to it. And so, do you see what I mean? Like, I think in most cases, it's both necessary and practical to fill out that second order Vedantic religion with specifics of your own first order religion.
So that it does answer the second question, and it leads directly to my third question.
Great, okay.
In that same talk, you talk about the ability of Vedanta as a meta religion to be that second order for the other major religions.
Oh yeah, to accept other religions and to help us to learn
and
from
that
them.
a person it helps us to structure, right?
Yeah.
You build your own
Religion
faith,
in a way.
right?
Yeah,
You build your own religion.
Yeah.
What place, if any, would atheism have in that structure?
Yeah, that's really
Would you
interesting.
have to have, right, like a religion in that first order?
Right. Okay. So where does an atheistic religion fit in? Okay, this is a great question. It gets complicated, and I tackle this in detail in chapter 3 of my book on Vivekananda. So if you're interested, you can look at that, because Swami Vivekananda has a really interesting lecture called "The Necessity of Religion," which is erroneously put as the first chapter in his book Jnana Yoga. It's very strange, this collection called Jnana Yoga, because whoever the editors were at the time, they threw in this first lecture, which has nothing to do with Jnana Yoga. Okay, don't ask me why. Okay, so in this lecture called The Necessity of Religion, he discusses how religion began and the evolution of religion. It's very interesting. I'm not going into that. But in another place in that same lecture, he talks about these issues about Vedanta as this all-encompassing kind of religion. And he has this he introduces this really interesting term. It sounds very technical. IUA is the abbreviation which I use. Ideal unit abstraction. Ideal unit abstraction. Capital I, capital U, capital A. Okay? He says, every religion posits an ideal unit abstraction. Why doesn't he just say every religion posits some God or some divine? Because I think he felt that that would be limiting it to just theistic religions. Then what about Buddhism? Does Buddhism posit some conception of God? No. At least the original form. So he comes up with this term, ideal unit abstraction, and the examples he gives are very interesting because one of them is ethical humanism, which is atheistic. Right? Ethical humanism is, what's the ideal of ethical humanism? He calls it the perfect human. But what he says is, notice, he says, every ideal unit abstraction is something that is not perceivable by the senses. Nobody has ever seen a perfect human being. You might call somebody perfect, but there's always going to be an exaggeration. There's no such thing as a perfect human being in that ethical sense. The person, it's beyond the senses, so you project an ideal. And so even the atheist ethical humanist, for instance, will still posit an ideal unit abstraction, which still makes it a religion in the relevant sense that Swami Vedanta is talking about, which means that you can still be a kind of second order Vedanta. Now, the catch here is that atheist is not going to accept the first premise of the second order Vedantic religion, right? Because the first premise is, I believe in an ultimate reality, which is infinite and illimitable, which is personal and impersonal, with and without form. That's bogus. I don't believe in anything transcendental. Buddhists also, at least like Theravada Buddhists, for instance, they're not going to accept that. Swamiji knew that. So I talk about this in detail, right? They're not going to accept it. But what the Vedantin says is, they're still nonetheless closet Vedantins in a sense. even if doctrinally they don't accept the second order Vedantic religion. At the end of the day, through their particular spiritual practice, whatever that is, whether it's ethical humanism, whether it's a Theravada Buddhist practice of mindfulness and this and that, when they realize the goal of their religion, so in Buddhism it's nirvana, right? What Swamiji will say is, that nirvana, what the Buddhists call nirvana, is the realization of non-dual pure consciousness. So they end up at the same goal that the Vedantins talk about. They just didn't call it that. And what about the ethical humanists? Even though the ethical humanists are atheists who don't believe in any kind of ultimate reality, if and when, through their own ethical humanistic spiritual practice, if they genuinely eradicate ego and selfishness, the goal they arrive at is the realization of the infinite, illimitable divine. Even if that's not the way they would describe their own tradition. So it gets complicated, actually. And so if you want more details, look at chapter 3 of my book, Swami Vedanta Cosmic. Thank you. Excellent questions. I'm glad some of you have done your homework and are watching my lectures, reading my books. If not reading them, at least you had an assignment. Joking. It was a playful dig.
So I have tons of books. And
Yeah, and I hear you, man.
I only read a small portion.
Eventually, yeah. Maybe in this lifetime. All right, any other questions?
You got time.
And people like me who are not like Bill reading too many books, just Swamiji,
Yeah. Tell me your name.
Ananta.
Ananta.
Vidur's wife.
Vidur's wife. Oh, okay. Yes.
I thought I'd put the connection there for you. So.
Two opposite.
No, it's funny.
Very worried.
And you're non-Bengali also.
I'm non-Bengali.
I can tell you. Okay.
But আমি বাংলাও বলতে পারি।
Wow. Very impressive. You already impressed me. Okay, continue. Yeah, go ahead.
So Swamiji, people like me, where do we start? Like, who are very worldly.
Oh.
And,
The very fact that you're saying that means you're humble, you're honest. These are spiritual qualities. So you're not as worldly as you think. Okay, continue.
I
Yes.
don't read books, and whenever I try to do some meditation, I'm just not concentrating that
Yes.
much. Some thoughts come in my
Naturally,
mind.
that happens to everybody.
And But one good thing I do, whenever I look at any god, my god which I pray to is Hanumanji,
Yes.
and then when I look at him, it just makes me very happy.
See, Devata. That's why our first order. You need the first order religion. Hanuman.
No.
Good. Yes.
So.
You're not worldly at all. You're a very spiritual person. You love Hanuman.
I love Hanuman. That's it.
That's it. That's all you need. There's a beautiful story Thakur tells, Sri Ramanuja tells in the Gospel, when Chaitanya sees a very old man crying. And he comes up, he sees this man, seems like an illiterate villager, weeping, as he's listening to a person reciting the Bhagavad Gita in Sanskrit. And Chaitanya is very surprised. And so he asks this old man, he says, "You don't know Sanskrit, do you?" He says, No, I don't know one word of Sanskrit. Then why are you crying? He says, "I'm just picturing Bhagavan Krishna giving these beautiful teachings to Arjuna and it brings tears to my eyes." That's bhakti, that's your Hanuman, so that's the wonderful thing.
Looking, where should I start? Because whenever I
You're already started.
Just all lost. Start and lost.
You don't need to be lost. You simply pray with tears in your eyes to Hanuman, Lord Hanumanji, and listen to Hanuman Chalisa and devotional bhajans, and beautiful songs about Rama and Hanuman. That itself will take you to the highest. There you'll realize Hanuman there. Spiritual life is very easy, actually. And what you're saying about books and all that, my goodness. Some of the worldliest people are the ones who read too many books. That's why Sri Ramanuja will say pandits, merely intellectual people, great scholars, are like vultures soaring high in the sky, but with their sights set on the carrion on the ground. Kama kancha, lust and greed. You see, because it can be a source of ego. It's a wonderful thing that you don't care for books, actually.
No. I try, but hota nahi hai. Cannot.
Don't force yourself to do something that's unnatural. Who cares? Books are pointless. Swamiji in one place says, "I wish I could throw my brain in the Ganga." Yeah. Oh, the other part of it, going back to your question way back, it reminded me of another thing. But because now I'm answering like kind of you guys in the opposite ways, which is just to create more confusion. It's fun. So in relation to you now, coming back, there's a really moving and interesting incident in the Gospel when Naran is steeped in Western philosophy because he's studying philosophy as an undergraduate at Scottish Church College. And he comes to Sri Ramakrishna one day, and these Western educated people, they love quoting in English and all that. So he quotes Hamilton, William Hamilton, who was a well-known Scottish philosopher at the time, which is in the 19th century, who's now almost forgotten. And he quotes this really interesting line, which he learned from one of his philosophy classes. The line is, "A learned ignorance is the end of philosophy and the beginning of religion." A learned ignorance is the end of philosophy and the beginning of religion. And Sri Ramakrishna says, "What did you say?" And then Naran translates it into Bangla. Something like that. He gives a beautiful little Bangla translation off the cuff. And then Sri Ramakrishna says, thank you, in English. He said a few words in English. Thank you. He loved it. See, if through reading books you arrive at a standpoint of intellectual humility, a recognition of your own limitations, a recognition of the limitations of the intellect and reasoning, and you say, you know what, through all this I realize I know very little or nothing. And then you open yourself to possibilities beyond reason, beyond the ego. You become humble. That's what Sri Ramakrishna liked about this. So he didn't discourage study, but he said the aim of study should be becoming humble and ultimately leading you into a deeper spiritual practice and becoming open to spiritual possibilities. If all that learning and study makes you arrogant and fanatical, then there's no point. In fact, that's the opposite of spirituality.
Well, good, thank you.
Thank you.
Because all of the reading doesn't make me feel smarter. So.
No, nobody needs to study anything. I think this is a misunderstanding of spiritual life. You don't. That's why God came in the form of Sri Ramakrishna this time, to prove that you don't need to even know how to read a book in order to realize the highest and to get liberated. That's how incredible that this new incarnation is. It's the whole point. Simple bhakti, simple devotion. Swami's teachings were extraordinarily simple. It's all about sincerity. That's why he didn't just say pray. He said literally pray with tears in your eyes. I don't think we take it literally enough, but he meant it literally. Tomorrow, or not tomorrow, day after tomorrow, pray without ceasing in the Hindu temple. It'll be about that. He meant it absolutely literally. In fact, Mahapurush Maharaj, I believe, he said this, that when he would meditate, because we're in our night reading in Hollywood, we're reading For Seekers of God. And he's talking about an incident when all these young men are with Sri Ramakrishna staying overnight, engaged in intense meditation throughout the night. And one day, after he does his meditation, Sri Ramakrishna comes to him very eagerly, looks at Mahapurush Maharaj, meaning Shivanandaji, the one who became Shivananda Maharaj. He said, "Did you meditate with tears in your eyes? Did you pray with tears in your eyes?" And then Shivananda Maharaj said, "Yes, I did." He was asking again and again, with tears in your eyes, with tears in your eyes, did you or did you not? Just praying, it becomes mechanical. It's just words. Tears in your eyes means what? The prayer is coming from the heart. It's the heart that matters, not what happens at the mind. That's why in Gita there's this beautiful line, Mano Hridi Nirudhyacha. Stop the mind in the heart. That's the spiritual practice. That's why I had to move away from Shankara to this weekend. I was so intellectually top-heavy for so long. I didn't even know I had a heart. Really. That was a journey for me, is like to realize, oh, wait a minute, spiritual life really is about the heart. What William Butler Yeats called the foul rag and bone shop of the heart. We're too intellectual. The whole, this whole post-enlightenment age, not just in the West, but now because of globalization, even in India, we're all just too intellectual. We're too smart. And we think too highly of ourselves. And so naturally we're attracted to more intellectual kind of spiritual traditions. Buddhist mindfulness, Advaita Vedanta, all these things. They're sexy. They're, because they kind of, they feed into our ego, our intellectual egos in a certain way. Bhakti, it seems crude, old-fashioned, blind faith. We'll have all these terms to dismiss it. At the end of the day, we come back to it when we become mature and spiritual, and when we really dive deep into spiritual practice. That's my opinion. I mean, I'm talking from my own experience.
And then what about so karma yoga? We should keep going.
Of course.
Karma.
See, karma yoga in Gita, you'll find if you study the Gita carefully, without bias, karma yoga is not separate from bhakti yoga. Actually, you cannot put them in airtight compartments. The way that Bhagavan Krishna defines karma yoga, look at chapter 3. Mai sarvani karmani sanyasyadhyatma chetasa nirashi nirmamo bhutva yudhyasva vigatajvaraha. Krishna says to Arjuna, this is equally karma yoga, this is equally bhakti yoga, this is also jnana yoga. You'll see it combines everything beautifully. And Raja yoga, all four yogas in one shloka. What's the verse? Whatever you do, sarva karmani, sanyasya mai, give it up to me. Offer it to me, make it an offer to me. And then what do? So first of all, that's karma yoga. But that's also bhakti yoga, because who's the me? It's Krishna, Bhagavan Krishna. You're offering it to God. And adhyatma chetasa. Keep your mind focused on the adhyatma. What is the adhyatma? Ramanuja's jnana yoga, that eternal individual soul, separate from the body-mind complex. So you've already got karma yoga, bhakti yoga, and jnana yoga. Nirashi nirmamo bhutva yudhyasva vigatajvaraha. Nirashi, being free from any kind of I want this, I want that, I want this to happen, I want that to happen, I don't want this to happen. None of those things. And nirmamo bhutva. You free from me and mine, egoism, selfishness. I'm so great because I'm doing this, I'm doing that. Yudhyasva, fight, O Arjuna. And here it's not just the war, but metaphorically it's this battle of life. How should you fight? Vigatajvaraha, devoid of the fever of the soul. What is this fever? The fever of ego, the fever of selfishness. This whole life of worldliness, so long as we haven't realized God, we're living this kind of unnatural life. That fever comes from not realizing that everything is perfect as it is. If we just surrender to God, if we can be that baby kitten, which just says mew, mew, and lets mother cat take us into her mouth and place us wherever she wants without us protesting or, I want to be placed here, I want to do this, I want to do that, I'm so great. It's all I. If you can just surrender that I to God, all problems cease. That one verse, Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Raja Yoga, because you're concentrating on the inner Atman and also concentrating on God and offering everything to God. Everything, let your entire life be a sacrifice to the divine.
It's very hard to give up that I.
That's why we keep coming back.
Yeah.
And yet it's the easiest thing to do, surrender, right? It's the hardest and the easiest thing at the same time. We just have to let go. And letting go is the hardest thing in the world. That's why Swami gives a beautiful example of the bird sitting on the mast of a ship, surrounded by infinite ocean. What happens? The bird gets a little bored on the mast. So what does it do? I feel like flapping my wings. So it starts flying far into the north, toward the north. Keeps going, sees nothing but this infinite, no land anywhere. Gets tired, gets worried. Will I die in this ocean? So with great difficulty, flies back, finally gets back to the mast of the ship. Sits there. After some time, let me stretch my wings again. And now it goes on the east. Goes far, same thing repeated. East, comes back, tired again. But then gets bored again. Then west, and then south. Finally, after going north, east, southwest, finally, after, what does that stand for? Many lifetimes is what that means of our own foolishness. We can finally settle down on the mast and be that baby kid. Surrender is the hardest thing in the world, but when we can do it, we're just in the lap of God. We're in the lap of Mother.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, please. No, don't feel shy.
Sorry to,
No,
sorry to go back to the whole thing.
Don't apologize.
I totally get it. I have, let's see if I can use that. Okay, so my question is, with your explanation, how you had described the various lokas and that whoever feels the affinity towards that, that's their eternal loka.
Yes.
Is that description based on like metaphysical fact, or is that meant to be a compatible story brought down to the level of someone who requires that?
Right.
I wasn't sure.
Yeah.
Where that went.
Yeah, and are you asking from the standpoint of Shankara or from the standpoint of Sri Ramakrishna?
I guess either.
Okay, well, the answer is going to be different in both cases. So that's why. Okay, so great question. I'll repeat it for the benefit of the online audience. He's going back to the picture I was sketching of Sri Ramakrishna's understanding of what's called postmortem eschatology, which means what does the final state of liberation or salvation look like? And my understanding of Sri Ramakrishna is that I like to describe it as a many-roomed mansion. Okay, which means what? Means it's not monolithic. So it's not that every liberated soul after the death of the body ends up in the same place and that we all have to live together for eternity, because that may not be that pleasant actually. Okay, so that means the liberated Christian souls will be in the Christian room in this many-room mansion. The liberated Muslims in the Muslim room called Jannah. Vaishnavas, liberated Vaishnavas in Goloka. Ramakrishna followers, Ramakrishna Loka. These are all different rooms in the mansion. Now, what about those who don't care to live in any of these rooms? That's Advaita, that's also Buddhism, right? Buddhist Nirvana, Advaitic Nirvana. That's just dwelling in non-dual pure consciousness. Now your question is, well, that's well and good and it sounds nice, but is that just a kind of imaginative fancy or something to sort of make people who are struggling on the path and aren't up to practicing the path of knowledge to kind of pacify them and make them feel good? Or does it correspond to real metaphysical fact? That's the question. And what Sri Ramakrishna says is, it corresponds to fact because he has realized the truth of the many-room mansion, because he's realized God in so many different forms. And he's realized the truth of Nitya Sakara, that's the term I used earlier, that there are eternal forms of God that never melt. Which means there are also Chinmoy, Sham, Chinmoy. He doesn't speak as a philosopher, he speaks as a realizer. So everything he says is based on his own direct spiritual realization. So one of those realizations is that the state of liberation is vast, in itself infinite in a certain sense. Because when a new incarnation comes, that means that incarnation has to create a new loka. What's the evidence for this? Holy Mother, very interesting conversation. There's a householder disciple who comes to Holy Mother and says, Mother, I don't care for this nirvana, which is again this Advaitic kind of dissolution of your identity and non-dual Brahman. What will happen to us? And he's asking with real, almost pain in his heart. You know what Holy Mother says? Why are you worrying? Sri Ramakrishna has created Ramakrishna Loka for you. You see, before the Ramakrishna incarnation, the Ramakrishna Loka didn't exist. It couldn't, because there's no Ramakrishna incarnation on this earth. Sri Ramakrishna came in physical form in 1836, left his body in 1886. He created the Ramakrishna Loka for his followers, for his devotees, in the future, like us also. Future avatars will create new lokas. This is an infinitely expanding. You can keep renovating. That's the beauty of this many-room mansion, and it corresponds to metaphysical fact because Sri Ramakrishna has realized all these different rooms. Shankara, what will he say? No. He'll say there's no many-room mansion, no coming and going. He believes in temporary heavens from the Vyavahadika standpoint, from the empirical standpoint. But what is the empirical standpoint, really? The standpoint of ignorance. Ignorance of what? Your true nature is non-dual Brahman. So what he gives with one hand, he takes away with the other. So if you're really honest and you actually study Shankara properly, which means reading his commentaries, what you'll find is he's very, very serious about the only reality is non-dual pure consciousness. And what does that mean metaphysically? Ajata. Gaudapada was absolutely clear about this. Shankara is too. Unfortunately, people don't read Shankara's commentaries. What they read is Bhaja Govindam, these devotional hymns, which he almost certainly didn't compose. Devotional hymns. If you want to understand Shankara, study his commentaries, especially his commentary on the Brahma Sutra. And he says it absolutely emphatically. I quote the passage in chapter 2 of my book on Vivekananda. You can find it. He says, even the personal God is only real, it only exists from the standpoint of ignorance. And he says, when you realize Brahman, what happens? All those upadhis fly away. The upadhi of the personal God also disappears. And what's left is Nirvana Brahman. All names and forms that we see, chairs, individual human beings, microphone, this, that, turns out to be, it never existed. It wasn't even a dream, because that, at least for the time being, the dream existed. Even that's not true. No, there's no dreamer, no dream. None of this ever existed. That's a Jatavada. So that's Shankara's position. If you understand Shankara properly, what's happening these days is, I'm tempted to write an article at some point called "Will the Real Shankara Please Stand Up?" Any of you know Eminem? There's a song of "Will the Real Slim Shady Please Stand Up?" Now you know I grew up in the 80s and 90s. So I want to write, "Will the Real Shankara Please Stand Up?" Because these days what happens is Shankara has become such a cultural and spiritual icon, not only in India but throughout the world. He has so much prestige, and I'm not putting him down. I'm saying he's become larger than life. So everybody wants a piece, and everybody wants to pull him in their direction, including RSS, for instance. The even right-wing Hindus, they're doing this big thing, this big project in this Omkareshwar, 108-foot statue of Shankara. I believe that's already done, right? It's already completed. They have this huge, massively funded project, BJP-funded project. Shankara is one of the big spokesmen, and Swami Vivekananda also, actually. So they co-opt these figures in support of their causes. And many people are doing it. Shankara is pulled in a million directions. Now, one of those directions is by bhaktas. And so they want to say that Shankara was a great bhakta. And there are people who, they love Shankara, and yet they also want the world to be real. And so they no, Shankara didn't say the world is unreal. No. But when I ask for evidence, they have nothing to say. You know? So just whatever claim you, try to be rigorous, try to be a little bit serious. And whatever you believe Shankara says, show me in the commentaries. Show yourself, prove it to yourself. But don't put words into his mouth, because that's not doing justice and it's not respectful to Shankara, or to anybody for that matter. Try to understand what the great Shankara actually said by reading his own words. That's what I'm encouraging each of you to do, if you're serious about Shankara. Just watching Sarvabhaum's lectures is not enough. It's a great start. He was my acharya. But what did he do? He taught us Shankara's commentaries in training center for 2 years. I was lucky enough to have him as my acharya for 2 years. He went through Shankara's Sanskrit commentary word by word. That's what each of you needs to do if you really want to understand Shankara.
Yes. You guys okay?
It's been a very interesting Q&A, going from extreme bhakti to everything in between.
Well, that's the way of Sri Ramakrishna, right? This is the whole idea.
Yes.
Did you say birthday was August 24th?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Uh-oh.
I
Why are you?
always ask because it's 8/24, and so it reminded me of your birthday.
Today is 8:24. Look at
Yeah.
that. There you go. It's a nice time to place to stop the Q&A unless there's another question. But anyone else? Yes, please.
Quick one.
Yeah, no problem. It doesn't need to be quick.
Let's see. So I have another question on this is not going back to Sri Aurobindo. So there was a section in here in the Life Divine, or it was in Letters of Yoga.
Yeah.
But there was a part where he brings up the comparison with Vedanta.
Yeah. Shankara's always qualify Advaita with Shankara, because Sri Aurobindo was an Advaitin too. That's the whole point of my whole trilogy of books. I call it the integral Advaita trilogy for a reason. They're all Advaitins, but they're teaching a broader, all-encompassing Advaita that differs from Shankara. So go ahead now, continue. Yeah.
Okay. So he gives I guess like sort of a head nod towards the original concept, I guess, like how it's been practiced traditionally.
What's Advaita?
Right.
Shankara's Advaita.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right. And then when he goes on to explain the integral yoga, he described it as more like an adventure, but not in contradiction to the previous versions that have been taught before.
Mm-hmm.
So he's giving like this, what would you call it, an affirmation of how people understood it to be prior to from the tradition.
Yeah.
But then that
Right.
this integral yoga is
It goes further.
It's sort of an optional adventure if one wants to partake in
Oh,
it.
yeah.
And he describes it as that, and so I was
Yeah.
like, I wasn't quite clear.
Okay. Yeah, great. That's a great question. Okay, so here's the way I see it, okay? Sri Aurobindo fully accepts that through the practice of what Shankara calls Jnana Yoga, the path of knowledge, you can attain liberation. Absolutely no doubt about it. How does he know it? Because when he grew up in England, as you probably know, studied at Cambridge, classics, then came back to India. He's in Baroda. After he was a freedom fighter, he comes to Baroda, and he meets this yogi called Vishnu Bhaskar Lele. And Lele was actually a bhakta. He was not a follower of Shankara, but he teaches him meditation. Okay, and Sri Aurobindo follows what he tells him. And to the surprise of both Vishnu Bhaskar Lele and to the surprise of Sri Aurobindo, who was also not a follower of Shankara at the time, attains the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi within 3 days. Salto melts in the ocean. Then he comes back and he says, I saw this entire world as a cinematographic play of vacant form superimposed upon the impersonal Sat Atma, Brahma. He has a direct spiritual realization, Brahma Satyam Jagat Nitya. He feels it to be true. And yet, and Lele scolds him. He says, that's not the right kind of, that's because he's the bhakta. He said, you shouldn't be feeling that way. And Sri Aurobindo himself said, well, and he has this feeling. And then he says, wait a minute, but that's not the highest. He felt that intuitively. And then what happens? He goes to jail. Sorry, this is actually while he was still a freedom fighter. He's jailed for his political activities. He's in Alipur jail in Kolkata. And in jail, he starts practicing the sadhana of the Gita, Bhagavad Gita. And then he has a greater spiritual realization, which I would consider to be what Sri Ramakrishna calls Vijnana. Because he sees everything as Vasudeva. Vasudeva Sarvamiti Samahatma Sudlavaha, chapter 7 Gita. He sees the prisoners as Krishna. He sees the blankets that are on his body, the coarse blankets, as Krishna. He sees the prison grating as Krishna. He sees the rapists and the murderers as Krishna. Everybody as Krishna. That's Vijnana. And then he sees that this world is a blissful manifestation of the divine. So now, in a sense, of course he accepts Advaita, this Shankara's Advaita. Why? In this sense, he accepts the reality of Nirguna Brahman. He accepts that in the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, you don't perceive this world. You don't perceive any personal God or Shakti. And if you come back from the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, he also accepts the fact that at least experientially, it just feels as if this world is a dream. He accepts even that. But then he says, but in a deeper sense, if you go deeper in spiritual life, like Sri Ramakrishna says, if you go from jnana to vijnana, you'll realize that this world is not a framework of illusion, bhokatati. It's actually mojakuti. It's a mansion of mirth. It's a mart of joy. If you go further, if you don't stop at that place, you can stop and get liberation right there. That's what he means. If all you want is liberation, don't practice integral yoga. But if you want to serve humanity, like what did Swamiji say in that beautiful letter? May I be born again and again and serve my God the wicked, my God the suffering, my God the ignorant. People who just want liberation are like the people who, as Sri Ramakrishna says, the person who with great difficulty climbs over the wall, looks at the other side, is completely stunned, bedazzled, and jumps over, ignoring all his friends on the other side. And then 3 people do that. They come up with great difficulty up to the wall, and then they jump to the other side, never to be seen again. There's one person who with great difficulty climbs to the top, sees the endless riches and beauty of the other side, but instead of plunging into that other side, comes back and throws a rope down for the others. Those are the integral yogis and the Vijnana Vedantins. And what Sri Ramakrishna calls Shiva Jnana Jiva Seva. Serve others in a spirit of worship by trying to see the divine in everyone. And just caring about your own liberation is a kind of higher form of selfishness. That's why when Naran wanted to be immersed in the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, Sri Ramakrishna gave him the scolding of his lifetime. Shame on you. I thought you would be like a great banyan tree, giving shade to thousands. Now I see you're selfish. You only care about your own liberation. Aren't you the one who sings, "O Lord, thou art all that exists"? There's nothing but God. Why would you be abandoning God here? You have to serve God and man, and human beings. Don't think about your own liberation. You'll automatically get your own liberation if you serve others in the spirit of worship. I don't know, does that answer the question? And the other thing is though, if you read Sri Aurobindo more comprehensively, he's one of the few who's bold enough to actually point out where his own understanding of the scriptures just flatly contradicts Shankara's interpretation. He's bold enough to disagree with Shankara's interpretation. Look at Ishopanishad. You can look at an essay of mine called Seeing Oneness Everywhere. Sri Aurobindo's mystical immanent interpretation of the Isha Upanishad. It's in the Bloomsbury Research Handbook of Vedanta. And he directly criticizes Shankara's interpretation of the Isha Upanishad. Because he thinks it's text torture, and I agree with it. And I start with an epigraph where he says, God laughed at Shankara 3 times. It's from a journal which he didn't publish. It was only published posthumously. But it's very interesting, the statement. God laughed at Shankara 3 times. Once, when Shankara wrote his commentary on the Isha Upanishad. Because if anyone's read the Isha Upanishad, it's very difficult to interpret it from a purely Shankarite standpoint. Because it's emphasizing the personal God, it's emphasizing the reality of this world as divine manifestation. It's emphasizing the need to engage in karma yoga your entire life. Each one of you should strive to live 100 years engaging in action continuously without stopping. And you know what Shankara says? That's meant for inferior spiritual aspects. It's meant for mandadhikaris. No evidence in the text that it's meant for inferior aspirants. So that's what Sri Aurobindo says. Right? So Sri Aurobindo, okay, that's the first time God left, when he wrote his commentary on the Isha Upanishad. Second time God left, when he came to his mother's funeral. Because then now suddenly his mother is real. Or why is he paying respects to his mother as a sannyasi? There's also, there are all these people. That's at least part of the legendary story of Shankara's life. Third, when he stormed about India preaching inaction. Those are the exact words. When he stormed about India preaching inaction. He went all over India, debating with other schools, with followers of other schools and defeating them in debate, proving the supremacy of Advaita Vedanta, proving that he's a great karma yogi. And yet, of course, he's a realized soul, so how can and should he be practicing karma yoga? Very complicated. He himself is teaching in his own commentaries that karma yoga is meant for mandadhikaris, for inferior spiritualists, but he is a realized soul. He's realized Brahman, he's a Brahmagyani. Why should he be engaged in karma yoga? Anyway, it's a very interesting kind of, just at least thought-provoking. And I start the essay with that. And then you can look at it if you want details on how Sri Aurobindo's interpretation of the scriptures differs from Shankara's. I've got a separate essay on Sri Aurobindo's interpretation of the Gita. And I bring in Shankara, Ramanuja. That's called Toward a New Hermeneutics of the Bhagavad Gita. You can find everything on both my website and Academia 80.
I know some of you guys came from a long distance, and we don't want to go too long. First,
It's been a wonderful over an hour and a half Q&A. So thank
you guys are amazing. So one thing I wanted to mention for the people at home and you guys, first of all, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Amazing. Thank you. Really, this was very exciting and very stimulating. This is just the beginning. We have a whole weekend. We're just getting started with our retreat. So tomorrow morning, we're going to do a hike to Red Rock Canyon. If you guys want to join us, you'd have to be here also online. We'll be here at 9 a.m. And then we're going to drive. Red Rock is just 15 minutes, 20 minutes from here. And we'll do an easier hike for those who may not want to hike up to the highest mountain and all that. So I thought it would be kind of nice, whoever wants to join us for that tomorrow, 9 a.m.
How long will the hike? What's the duration of the hike?
You know what? We're going to probably be out there. So each breakfast, then I would say just, a couple of 3 hours maximum, and we'll be back here. So by 9, 10, 11, 12, 12:30, we'll be back here. Because we got to get ready for part 2 of the Swamiji's the talks. Tomorrow will be actually an official talk, and it's the science of happiness.
Correct, the
right?
science of happiness.
So who wants to be happy? So we can get ready to be scientifically happy, right? Happy at any time you want to. It's science.
Right.
It's science, not even it's luck. So and that we're going to start at 5 p.m. I'm sorry, 5 p.m. I've made the schedule and I'm forgetting it. 5 p.m. we're going to do some more arti and bhajans with the Durji. And so we're so blessed to have him here this weekend. And we're lucky because he had the weekend off. Normally he would only
I don't think we met last time.
No.
This is the first time I'm meeting you.
First time.
Yes.
Oh, good.
I was listening.
Next time, I'll tell you a few songs that you need to practice to sing.
You have requests. You have requests. So tomorrow we'll have the pleasure of the Durji again. And then we'll have Maharaj's talk starting at 6 p.m. And that'll be live streamed as well. And we actually live streamed the doors chanting. So it's part of the recording and part of the live stream. Everybody enjoyed it. So, and then we have a prasad meal after this talk. So that's why we're going to finish so that we can start eating some of this lovely food everybody's made and prepared. And thank you all for coming. I know some of you came from the opposite side of the town. Both of you. So thank you so much.
I appreciate it too. Thank you so much.
And we hope you come join us tomorrow as well for Swamiji's talk. It'll be more of a formal talk, but there'll still be time for questions.
Q&A, of course, yeah.
Okay.
Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Shri Ram Krishna Namastu.
Thank you, Maharaj. Thank you all. Thank you, That's so much. And thank you all online. Thank you for coming and joining us. Hopefully we'll see you tomorrow.
How many joined online?
Hang on, I'll tell you. As soon as